So, we're back, and this time we're going to take care of the body of the guitar. And we're going to try to do, the first thing we're going to try to do is we're going to make it feel like the finish has been worn in by years and years of playing. And if you've played an old Stratocaster, that is a very comfortable thing, especially around this area where your arm will rub against the finish. That's the place you feel it the most. Also on the back, in the belly carve, it's a place where you also feel it the most. But I like to do it all over the entire body, just because I like to keep the finish the same all over, because it's going to get a little bit duller once we're done with it. And you can do it just here if you want to go for something that looks more relict or something like that, but I'm not really trying to relic this guitar. I'm just interested in getting it to more feel like an old guitar. And so what I'm gonna do first is that I'm gonna use a sander. You can do this with sandpaper, it's just gonna take a lot longer. And I'm gonna use some water that I have in a glass over here, and then I'm gonna use sandpaper, and I'm using around 1200 grit. You can do 800 and then walk up, but I just take 1200 and I just started that, and I just do that. And I'm just going to sand the entire body. So that's what we're going to do now. And I'm just going to start with hitting the face of it and then the back. And then I'm going to hand sand the side of the guitar. And that's just because, as you can see on my machine, it's flat and it doesn't really get into the contours of the body very well. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I start up by just putting some water on the guitar and smearing it out, and then starting the machine. So when you're sanding, especially around the contour of the armrest, think carefully about how you move your sander, because it's very easy for it to sand through the finish here, because the flat bottom against the curvature makes it very easy to go through. So be extra careful and mindful of how you move your sander when you're over this spot. And maybe even do it in sections to make sure you don't go through, because then you'll have a line across the face down in that direction, and that won't look very good. Especially, I mean, if you're trying to make it look relic, that's a weird form of relic. So don't do it even if you're doing it for relicking. So now we've sanded the entire body, and it is time to put some car polish on it. You don't need to spend extra money buying something super special, just, buy something that seems like it will do the job. And all we're going to do is we're going to smear it all over this guitar body, and we're going to use some tissue paper for it. But I don't use a regular tissue paper, I use tissue paper for car polishing, which looks like some sort of polyfiber thing. It's probably made out of some sort of fabric. And all I do is I rip off a piece, I fold it up into something that I can handle a little bit easier. I shake the bottle. I've already shaken it a bit, but you have to do it on camera so that people believe that you actually did shake it. And then I'm just putting some on. It's always, doesn't really matter if you put too much on, you can always take it off. And then I'm just smearing it out over the entire body, getting a nice even coat. Something like this. take some on the sides as well. I'll do the sides separately. I go through and take the top and then the back and then the sides, and I let that sit for a couple of minutes. In the hardware store you can buy these polishing pads that fit in your drill, just a couple of bucks, and you can polish a lot of guitars with it. And then you can, when you see that it starts to get matte, I don't think you can see it on this guitar right now, but it's starting to sink in. I just take the drill and I just polish over the entire surface. And I go back and forth and back and forth, and I work it into the finish. And I press down pretty hard, try to compress this down a bit. So it takes a little bit of elbow grease, but it's easier to do it with the drill than to do it by hand, which you can also do, but it will take a lot longer. Take some clean tissue, then just run it over it to get rid of any excess. And as you can see, hopefully, it has gotten some sheen back, but not a lot. But it's super smooth and comfortable on my hand. It has that silk feel. So when my arm, when I play, rubs against this, it's going to be super comfortable. And then we just do the same thing on the back, smear some of that on, take the tissue again and just put it out all over in an even nice coat. Just smear it on. Try to take some of the sides, just the round over basically, if I haven't been overly explanatory over that fact that I'm taking just the roundovers, making sure, try to get as little finish as I possibly can into the cavities, not because it matters that much, but it's always nice if things are neat, especially like when you're making your own guitars. Not that I made this, but you know what I mean. And then I just let it sit for a while until I can see that the finish is starting to doll up and sink in. Go back and forth maybe a little bit where I can see spots that don't have an even coat. You know, it's always check what you're doing while you're doing it to make sure you don't do something wrong. And then when you feel like you can see the finish going in, you just repeat the steps. You take the drill, you take the sponge, and you and once you're pretty happy with it, you take a rag and you go over it and you just remove the excess, and you put some elbow grease into it, maybe make the surface a little bit warm. And then it's on to the sides. You basically do the same step and you just polish them up. But the next step is that I'm gonna shield pickup cavities and the control jack. You can also do that by painting it with shielding paint. This area is a little bit trickier than the rest. So what I do is I measure out a big piece that I think will fit, and then I push it against, and I try to get an even shape into it of this half. And then I cut that out, make sure it fits, reshape it a little bit if it doesn't, and then I put it in to the next level, and I do the same thing but for the other side, where I scrape it against this side and I get a line to cut to. I take it out and then I follow that line instead, and that's how I'd make it easy for myself to find something that will fit in there. And then I just pull one side of the tape off and I press it in there as neatly as I can. Something like that. I missed a little bit in that corner, but that's okay. I can just put a tiny little bit of tape in there and it will sort itself out. So now it's time to go through the entire body and put some solder in all the joints of the tape that we put down. So for example, here in the middle, I hope you can see there is a seam, and basically all we need to do is to melt some solder and try to make it stick. Okay, now that I have gone through and soldered joints everywhere, I am going to put the ground wire in. And this is how I do it, and it's just because it's what I think a really easy way to make sure that it is secured to the body, and that is that I take the wire that I'm going to use and I pull away the outer shield, exposing copper wire, and then I take the copper wire and I twist it around like you would normally do, so it becomes a long thin rod. Then I take a nail, a regular, building a wall inside your house, everyday nail, and I twist it around it and then I twist it around itself on the opposite end. Now what that does is it allows me to make a tiny little ring, basically, which I hope you can see. And all I do is that I put solder on this to solidify it, basically. Especially where they meet. So I melt the solder into the ring, make sure I get a good even coat. And all I have to do then is that I have to decide where I want to put the wire, because I don't want it to be in the way, and I also obviously don't want it to be somewhere where it can cause problems for any other electricity that is in the guitar. So what I do is I take an awl and I decide somewhere where I want to put it, and usually somewhere around this area I think is a good place. So I just take the awl and I push it down into the wood, press enough to go through the tape and also a bit into the wood. And now what I do is I take the wire and I take this tiny little screw, which I hope you can see that I have, and I put it in the ring that I've made. I then take a screwdriver and I screw it into the body, and that will make the wire sit against the tape in the body very securely. So now, as you can see, hopefully it's been screwed in place, and we could maybe even cement it. And now we can take some more solder and we can just remelt everything to make sure everything has a super nice connection to each other. Something like that. That's probably going to work. And then I can just leave this other wire alone for now, and this will then get stripped a bit and soldered to the back of the volume pot, but we'll take care of that later on when we go to the assembly part. That's that. We're done for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoy this video and that you basically are inspired now to do some creative things with your own guitars, building your own guitars, or maybe polishing up a guitar that you already have that maybe looks a bit dull, or that maybe needs some care and love, you know? Sometimes we feel like we should buy new guitars all the time, but sometimes, you know, taking care of the ones we have is an even better thing. Anyway, stay tuned for the next video, and hopefully you will enjoy that one too. Have a nice day and go and build a guitar.